Hello everyone, today our group will introduce an article for you. The topic is Chinese second language socialization. This is our outline. We have divided the contents of the presentation into these 7 main sections. Socialization usually refers to the process in which people acquire knowledge, skills, and disposition, and thus develop into proficient members of society. While language socialization mainly emphasizes the important mediating role of language in the process of socialization. It is a process beyond one's primary languages by which knowledge, non-familiar linguistic and cultural content gain into cultural communicative competence by acquiring linguistics such as pragmatic and other behaviors that are associated with the new culture. For example, it is the way or manner that a group of people interact within friends and family, obeying behavioral rules in public places. As research initially focused on the relationship between language, culture, and learning, and from a cross-linguistic perspective, it focused on cultural factors and school achievement in L1, such as exploring how peers and caregivers influence children's practical social engagement in classroom, family dinner tables, and other interactive settings. Since then, the research object has been continuously expanded, and researchers have been paying more attention to the important mediating role of micro-social environment and micro-specific situation in language ability, especially the development of second language and multilingual ability. In this way, the study of language socialization has gone through a process from initial development to gradually expanding its scope. In terms of Mandarin, it did not be involved in first-generation studies, but interest in Chinese and Mandarin in particular as a second language has grown rapidly over the past decades. The difference is that although Chinese has received more attention in recent years, SLA research in China is not as mainstream as it is outside East Asia. Analysis of Chinese development in terms of language socialization is even less common, either in L1 or L2. Therefore, the study of Chinese second language socialization will effectively fill the gap of this part of the research. Although Chinese SLA research has paid relatively little attention to the social or cultural aspects of language use and development, some basic related work has been conducted in the research of other East Asian languages. For example, Japanese and Korean received some attention as L2. At the same time, some early Chinese L1 research also involved cases of testing socialization through some specific activities, such as shaming practices. Language socialization and language acquisition have very different concerns, but there are also some relationships. Language socialization is concerned with identity, customs, social and cultural knowledge, and other ideologies about language prestige. In contrast, acquisition research investigates the cognitive and interactive processes associated with language development. These processes are often expressed in terms of the learner's language proficiency, for example, grammatical complexity, accuracy, and fluency. It is worth noting that language proficiency may be affected by one's identity, while some social cultural knowledge is also gained from social routines and other discursive practices. Therefore, current research considers language use, social rules, and identity to be expressive and fluid. In terms of second language socialization, the study of SLS is developed on the basis of language socialization, which mainly integrates the perspective of linguistics and anthropology. An important feature of second language socialization is that it focuses on the mediated nature of language development, drawing on social cultural theory to conceptualize social interaction as central to the language learning processes. Another point is that, unlike traditional SLA research that focuses on language development and learner competence, social approach examines the relationship between language forms and practices. Core issues and key research findings. Existing research have covered a wide variety of subjects, including specific language features and specific context of language use. Based on the feature of learners, these studies can be divided into three main categories: heritage language learners, bilingual immigrants, and ESL or EFL learners in informal contexts. The first two categories mainly focus on speech roles, pronoun usage, honorifics, code switching, and dialect use. This study were mainly done by He and Lam, and findings were mostly related to the identity of the learner. For example, Lam's research finds that learner can distinguish their identity from monolinguals through code switching and negotiate usage of multiple language and social acts to acquire online identities. The third category focuses on specific informal contexts, such as social media, pop culture, homestay, and study abroad. Research has found that immersive extracurricular experiences can foster interaction among learners by providing learners with shared activities and topics. Another point is that some resistance to socialization was found. For example, the learners' refusal to follow normative classroom conventions. This means that language socialization can also lead to rejection or resistance to normative practices, creating new or hybrid ones.
Hello everyone, I am Hanzhizheng Misha. I'm going to present in the second part of our group's article presentation. Here, after having an overview of the current research findings in Chinese second language socialization, we can sort out some commonly used research approaches in the field. The reason why we have such diverse resources of descriptive and explanatory data is that language socialization research sees into various aspects of social life, which itself is naturally not static, but carries a dynamic feature, as it changes over time with social interactions. So this article generalized some typical research approaches, namely ethnographic fieldwork, case studies, linguistic or discourse analysis, and learners' narratives. So in an ethnographic fieldwork, the researcher basically is immersed in the target participant group and adopt multiple methods to learn about their circumstances, for example, through observation or recording. And a case study is usually lasted for a long period of time to keep a trace of specific cases, behaviors, and dispositions. It is usually around one or multiple focal members of the community. A discourse analysis focused on studying some specific linguistic features, for example, the choice of personal pronouns, the use of modal verbs, etc. So it's from the vertical perspective. And learners' narratives cover learners' reflections and perceptions on their personal experiences through the study of journal or some open-ended interview. And these are all practical approaches to conduct Chinese second language socialization studies. Subsequently, the author arranged a session discussing the implications for future curricula and teaching design. First, the author pointed out the limitation of explicit teacher-guided socializations in the second language classroom, stating the provided task design only provide materials that are grammatically correct but culturally inappropriate. Therefore, the author urges the design of teaching and learning to combine pedagogical benefits with authentic and appropriate language use in the target L2 community. Similarly, in textbook design, apart from providing selected sets of genres and registers of language use, there can be additional materials, maybe from the internet, to facilitate the second language socialization process, as they provide input of contemporary social linguistic variations, such as localized pragmatic use and newly emerged buzzwords. Lastly, the author also called for attention on extracurricular socialization. The suggestions are eliciting more exposure to the target second language culture, like pop culture. So we encourage them to meet up with fancy speakers of second language or maybe watch TV dramas in that language. That's an add to the input. It in turn provides more possibility to stimulate language output, as learners may want to post a message on the fan site. It's not their homework, but they can be productive when driven by the interests. Let's move on to the last part of the article. Since this is a review of the progress made in Chinese second language socialization research, the author also listed 7 suggestions for future research directions. First, the scope and scale. The existing research was conducted with a very constrained group of participants, and it is usually in an institutional context, as that's the most available one. So the suggestion is to cover a broader participant group, like age group, ethnic group, etc., and maybe look at learners' transnational experiences. The second suggestion reminds us the formative nature of language learning. Therefore, the research should not only focusing on children sitting in an L2 classroom, but learners of any ages. It is not all about their behaviors in class. Their extracurricular engagement with the Chinese language and culture through interaction also matters. Meanwhile, the roles of textbook and assessment forms in socializing L2 learners, they also require further investment. The third suggestion concerns the validity of the research findings, whether they can be applied to a general situation. The language socializing process cannot be evaluated merely on a particular kind of instructional or task design, or from a specific kind of interaction pattern. So we need a more scientific treatment, adopting multiple tasks to examine the actual development. Also, more longitudinal studies are preferred. The fourth suggestion calls for attention to the multiplicity and creativity in language repertoires, identities, and practices. We need to free the research from a monolingual group of L2 learner in a controlled or even experimental learning condition, and look at what it's like in reality. The fifth suggestion is to consider language socialization in different genres, registers, and linguistic constructions. So, how do learners behave in an oral or written discourse? Or what about in a specific field when using academic English or performing a clinic's writing? Also, despite the linguistic practices, what are those discursive practices of the learner? The sixth suggestion: in the digital era, future research can further investigate language socialization in an online community and study their language interaction. The last one is they can study the development of Chinese L2 learners' personal agency. Do they have the intention to gain the membership in Chinese speech community? And this kind of knowledge serves to explain why there can be sufficient duration to allow socialization to take place. So that's all about this review article. Our group also proposed several points of critique addressing the strengths and weaknesses of it. Since it is a review and the author already given comments to the existing research, our critique are from a macro perspective. First, this review generalized information of a very promising research field, namely Chinese second language socialization, which complements the traditional language acquisition research. And it covers both linguistic and cultural aspects as it introduced the terms and with the subsequent introduction of all the findings and the future directions. So we think in general it is very concrete and gives us an overview of the topic. However, there are still some areas for improvement. Like, what are the unique features of Chinese second language socialization? The term Chinese. What is the difference between the Chinese second language socialization and Korean ones? So I think it is not enough to only address issues in the linguistic and cultural aspect. You need to take the political dimension into consideration. So we noticed that the writer already mentioned there are a booming number of learners of Chinese, but that's not enough. You need to explicitly address issues from the political dimension, and it's unavoidable. We would like to see why it is Chinese and what's the difference between Chinese and other second language socialization. Here comes the last session. So I would like you to discuss why is it important to consider extracurricular engagement when studying L2 socialization. This is the reference. Thank you.